The chamber pulsed with ancient energy, its vaulted ceilings lost in a swirl of stars beyond transparent panels. Galaxies wheeled slowly overhead, but the eyes of every species present were locked on the lone human standing at the base of the forum. Commander Alara Mintz stood motionless, spine straight, face calm, but every nerve beneath her skin was alive with pressure. This wasn't a mission. It was history in the making. Before her, the Galactic Council shimmered across tiers, each species seated in their respective spheres, suspended in quiet luminescence. A chorus of clicking, rustling, and low-frequency tones passed between the delegates. Some towered in translucent forms of vapor and light. Others were all carapace and claw. There were those with no visible features at all, existing as shadows wrapped in containment fields. And above them all hovered the presiding conscience of the council, a crystalline orb housing the Vorthari Elder, whose telepathic resonance filled the air like the scent of ozone before lightning. When the Vorthari finally addressed her, its voice bypassed language entirely and echoed straight into her cortex. Human representative, Earth has been granted provisional recognition by the Council of Galactic Intellects. As part of standard integration, we require an assessment of species-level threat potential. State the identity of your planet's apex predator. The question settled over her like frost. Not because it was unexpected, her diplomatic briefings had warned of it, but because she had hoped she wouldn't have to answer it. Alara's hand hovered near her neural interface, as if drawing strength from the tactile link. She glanced at the species gathered around her and saw what they expected: a zoological curiosity, a terrestrial monster, something primitive, perhaps beautiful in its brutality. A shark, a lion, a serpent. Instead, she looked up and met the Vorthari's inner glow without flinching. "Humans," she said. There was a pause, an almost physical stillness, as if the room had stopped breathing. Then came the wave, reactions rippling out from the center. Some beings blinked their multiple eyes. Others hissed or shifted in agitation. The presiding conscience dimmed momentarily, the mental equivalent of narrowing its eyes. "Clarify," it intoned. Alara felt the familiar edge of duty rise within her. "We are our own apex predator," she said. "We hunt ourselves. We build tools not just to survive, but to dominate and, if necessary, to annihilate." From the far side of the chamber, a spindly ambassador from the Travax collective rose, its voice rasping through a translator sphere. "This contradicts logic. A species that preys upon itself undermines its own survival. That is not apex behavior. That is self-sabotage." "Not always," Alara replied evenly. "Sometimes it's strategic. Sometimes it's ideological. Sometimes it's simply habit." A whisper of data packets and bioluminescent pulses passed through the chamber, transmissions of unease, curiosity, disbelief. Alara let the silence stretch, giving weight to her claim. She was trained for combat, but she'd learned diplomacy was its own form of war. She could feel the eyes of Earth's distant representatives watching through quantum relays, waiting to see if she'd just doomed their future. "Explain," came the Vorthari again, more forcefully this time. "Evidence required." Alara inhaled. "We've eradicated more species on our planet than any natural disaster in recorded history. We turned the atom into a weapon before we understood its implications. We designed machines to calculate faster than thought, and then armed them with decision-making power in conflict zones. We evolved to cooperate, yes, but also to outmaneuver, to deceive, to destroy. And we do all of it with terrifying creativity." A low hum from the Grothian envoy, whose species had never known conflict, resonated through the chamber. "Then you are unstable. Dangerous." "Yes," Alara said. "But we are also capable of reflection, remorse, change." The room did not warm to that sentiment. A floating drone recorded her words in a dozen languages, streaming to planetary archives. She could almost hear the political strategists screaming through silent channels, telling her to soften, to redirect. But she wouldn't. The truth was too important now. Too old. Too heavy to varnish. Humanity's apex predator is not a beast hiding in the jungle or lurking in the sea. It's the mind that rationalizes cruelty. It's the hand that signs orders to send thousands to die. It's the voice that stokes fear, and the algorithm that learns what hate looks like and feeds it back to us until we can't look away. The Ixari delegate, whose species had outlawed warfare centuries ago, blinked in violet gradients. Then why should you be allowed among the stars? Alara raised her chin. Because we're trying to become something better. And that makes us uniquely aware of what not to become. The chamber paused again, this time not with confusion, but contemplation. The Vorthari's glow pulsed softly, resonating across the minds in the room. Further explanation required, it said. Justify continued existence in a galactic ecosystem. Alara's heartbeat didn't change. She was ready for this. She had rehearsed every word, yet somehow it felt like she was speaking for the first time. Not as a diplomat, but as a representative of something far older and more intimate. She looked into the eyes, or their equivalents, of every species present and said, "We are dangerous." That's true. But we are also aware of that danger. And no other predator we know of carries that weight, that knowledge. We stand at the edge of becoming either your greatest ally or your gravest lesson. That choice is still ours to make. The silence that followed was not empty. It thrummed with the awareness that something irreversible had just been set into motion. The lights dimmed as a stream of data threaded the air between Alara and the Vorthari. A confluence of images, sound, and electromagnetic pulses unfolded, transmitting the request formally. Present evidence of claim. Justify the classification of your own species as the apex threat of Earth. She didn't flinch. Her fingers moved across the neural interface pad embedded in her forearm, activating the visual array embedded in the floor of the chamber. The lights faded further. Silence followed. Then came the first image. A city seen from high above, glittering towers, the lattice of highways. Then came the detonation. White light bloomed like a false sun. A second later, a growing mushroom cloud eclipsed the skyline, incinerating what had once been civilization. Murmurs echoed through the chamber. A few delegates turned away, others leaned forward with fascinated horror. That, Alara said quietly, was humanity 70 years into mastering the atom. The bomb fell on a city during our third global war. It ended the conflict. It also made extinction a matter of decision rather than time. The Vorthari's mental voice surged. Why did you build such power? Because we could. Because the race to control it outweighed the race to understand it. She paused. And because some believed the capacity to destroy would ensure peace. It did, for a time, but at a cost. Another gesture. The projection shifted. Images cycled rapidly. Refugees trudging through flooded streets, forests reduced to smoldering black scars, starving children huddled beneath collapsing infrastructure. We waged war on our own climate. We poisoned oceans that fed us, raised forests that breathed for us, drilled until the earth bled. The predator in us was not only outward-facing. We hunted our own future for profit. There was a ripple through the chamber. The aquatics in the suspended fluid chambers flicked their fins with discomfort. One began a low-frequency lament, akin to mourning. A diplomat from the crystalline Enthai species rose, its light fracturing through the air. You mistake self-destruction for predation. Many young species engage in such errors. Why label yourselves predators rather than victims of ignorance? Alara nodded slightly. Because we understand our behavior and persist regardless. Predation requires awareness. We are not animals reacting to scarcity. We act with knowledge, with choice. A flurry of language burst from a segment of the council where no visible forms were present. Holograms danced in fluid geometries to represent voices of the non-corporeal Entha. A translator droned. What capacity do you possess to limit this behavior? Have your societies reigned in your destruction? Alara hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because the truth was layered. We try. We've built systems, governments, treaties, intergovernmental frameworks. Sometimes they work. Often, they fail under pressure. We swing between progress and relapse, between unity and tribalism. She tapped the pad again. Now came scenes of hope, marches against oppression, humans joining hands across continents, scientists working in unison to stop a pandemic, teams of engineers deflecting a rogue asteroid. The light in the chamber softened slightly. We're predators, yes, but we're also self-aware, capable of guilt, capable of imagining a better world, even when we fail to reach it. One of the insectoid species, hardened by centuries of internal conquest, hissed a sharp inquiry. Why not eradicate your dangerous elements? Why preserve them if they threaten the whole? Her gaze did not waver. Because the line between danger and innovation is thin. The same mind that builds a virus can cure a disease. The same engine that drives a weapon can launch a vessel beyond our star. We are not divisible that way. She could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The chamber was no longer reacting with hostility, just calculation. Some species admired power, others feared it. But all were drawn to the paradox of the human soul. The species that builds cathedrals and gas chambers with the same hands. Then the Vorthery shifted its tone. Present final evidence. Personal experience. You represent your species not as observer, but participant. Share what forged your belief. A breath caught in Alara's throat. The request had been anticipated, but preparing did nothing to dull the edge. Her voice, when it came, was stripped of artifice. I was 9 when my village was razed during the resource conflicts, she said. We called it the last war. It wasn't. I watched as soldiers, our own, detained families because they feared rebellion. I saw my brother executed for refusing to hand over supplies meant for children. I escaped. I survived. Later, I joined the military. I became the predator. She raised her eyes slowly. And then I walked away. Because if I stayed, I would lose the part of me that could still feel shame. The chamber was silent. Not in the way of boredom or dismissal, but the kind of silence that arrives when something vital has been understood. I speak for humans not because we are blameless, she continued, but because we are aware of what we've become. And if given the chance, we may still become something else. The Vorthery did not reply immediately. Its form shimmered, pulsing with unreadable patterns. Then it floated backward slightly, allowing other species to weigh in. Some were unreadable. A few nodded solemnly. Others whispered dissent. But the question had been answered. The predator was known. And for the first time in the Council's history, that predator had spoken not with pride or apology, but with warning. A low chime resonated through the council chamber, signifying deliberation had ended. The air turned electric, tense with the gravity of what was to come. Alara stood motionless, every fiber of her being alert. She had laid bare her species before entities that measured time in millennia and morality in cold logic. Now, judgment waited on the edge of their collective silence. The Vorthery pulsed brighter, its voice unfolding not just into Alara's mind, but across the entire assembly. The Council has reached preliminary consensus. Humanity is hereby classified as Tier 5, intellectually advanced, morally volatile, strategically unpredictable. There was no applause, no relief. Only a change in the air pressure, a subtle shift, like the moment before a storm breaks.
Tier 5.
It was not exile, but neither was it welcome. The designation placed Earth on high alert, watched, measured, tested. A species known to burn its own cradle was not to be trusted with the fire of the stars. Observation shall commence, the Vorthery continued. Technology sharing suspended. Diplomatic interactions monitored. Transit corridors restricted until reassessment. Alara didn't bow. She didn't thank them. She simply stood there, letting the decision land. Every restriction echoed the Council's verdict. You are dangerous, and we are afraid of what you might become. A wave of motion rippled through the chamber as delegations began to disband, their vessels preparing to detach from the orbital station. Some delegates glanced her way. Most did not. But one, a towering being of obsidian limbs and a lattice of pulsing veins, paused. The Alarian, known across systems for their cold detachment, extended a limb in her direction, a gesture rarely shared. "Your honesty is regrettably rare," it said, its voice like breaking stone. "We will watch, but we will also remember." The gesture passed as quickly as it came. Moments later, the Alarian shimmered out of existence, leaving only a faint charge in the air. Alara finally exhaled, her posture loosening. She turned and walked off the platform, boots echoing on the cold alloy floor. Behind her, the council dissolved into movement, discussion, and the quiet spin of politics, as if nothing irreversible had occurred. Her quarters were dimly lit, as she had left them. No congratulatory messages waited on her console. No orders. Just the silence of a new kind of solitude. Earth was no longer an anonymous blue. It was now a designated threat in the galactic ledger. That knowledge settled on her chest like a weight she could not remove. She sat slowly, unfastening the neural interface from her arm. Pain radiated beneath the skin where old augmentations still fused with scar tissue. She had fought wars for peace, then spoken truths for the same goal, and in doing so, had made her world a cautionary tale. The console flickered. A private transmission. Unmarked. Encrypted. She hesitated, then accepted. The face that appeared was not entirely human, though its shape suggested it had once been. Biosynthetic mesh stretched over reinforced bone. One eye organic, the other a gleaming lens. The voice that followed was unmistakable. "Commander Mintz." Alara straightened. "Director Solon. I didn't expect. You weren't meant to." "This channel is dark," Solon said. Behind him, a tactical display showed Earth's orbital defense grid. "You've done well." She frowned. "I've made us a threat." "You've made us seen," Solon corrected. "They feared us before they understood us. Now they respect us. That's more useful than friendship." Her jaw tightened. "Useful to whom?" "To survival," he replied. "The Council now knows we won't pretend to be harmless. That's strategic leverage." Alara stood, anger stirring in her gut. "I didn't go there to leverage fear. I went to tell the truth." "You did both," he said. "Intentionally or not. And now they watch us, which means they won't ignore us when we speak next." The transmission ended without farewell. Alara stood in the dimness, eyes fixed on the black beyond her viewport. Stars burned cold and distant, ancient fires that didn't care who ruled or who pleaded for mercy. Somewhere out there, decisions were already being made about Earth, its place, its limits, its consequences. She touched the control panel and brought up an image, a rotating sphere of Earth, still vibrant in its blues and greens. So beautiful, so utterly fragile. A chime sounded at the door. She turned. A young communications officer entered, barely past 20, his uniform crisp, but his expression uncertain. "Commander," he said softly, "there's something you need to see." He handed her a data tablet. She glanced at it and paused. The content was raw, live-streamed footage from Council-linked relays. On multiple worlds across Council space, discussions were erupting about humans. Some called for preemptive defenses. Others, surprisingly, argued for inclusion. Debates flared not about Earth's past, but about its future. She handed the tablet back. "Monitor the chatter. Compile who supports open dialogue." "Yes, ma'am," he said, saluting awkwardly before leaving. Alone again, Alara looked once more at the stars. The Predator had spoken, and the galaxy had listened. But listening was not understanding. Understanding was still to come.